Hello, I'm Carl Herzog, Public Historian for the USS Constitution Museum. And today I'm here in the Samuel Eliot Morison Library of the USS Constitution Museum to take a look at some of my favorite objects from the collection. The museum and the library are currently closed, but normally this reading room and our archives and collections vault are open to researchers who can come explore any of the thousands of objects and documents that we have available related to the history of USS Constitution. We're broadcasting live on Facebook and our chat window's open, so if you have questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to do so, and we'll try to get to them before we finish. Today, the object I wanted to talk to you about was Lieutenant Peter Turner's Watch Quarter Station Bill. Lieutenant Turner was born in Rhode Island in the early 1800s into what was a naval family, and he became a midshipman and then eventually a lieutenant. And while he was a lieutenant on board USS Constitution, at the time under the command of his uncle Daniel Turner, he created this Watch Quarter Station Bill. The ship at the time, between 1839 and 1841, was operating in the Pacific Squadron off of the coast of Chile, helping to protect American merchants and whalers in the Pacific Ocean at the time. I love the Watch Quarter Station Bill for a myriad of reasons in terms of what it tells us about life on board, and more particularly, specifically, about how the ship operated on board. But I thought I'd start with another object that comes from our Turner collection, which is an early daguerreotype photograph of Peter Turner that was taken while he was in Rio de Janeiro a little bit later on another billet. And I'm going to try and show this off. This is one of the early daguerreotypes that became popular in the mid-1800s. In this one, Peter would have been about 42 years old when he had this taken, and he was still lieutenant at the time. Promotions were very slow to come by between the War of 1812 and the American Civil War. And so he actually spent a long time, first as a midshipman and later as a lieutenant. But he did eventually rise up the ranks to commander and eventually retired in the 1860s as a Commodore. The photo shows him struggling to, and I hope I'm getting this, the photo shows him struggling to stare and keep still with his eyes wide open on the camera. It's in some ways a kind of shocking photo in that regard. But later photos that were also taken of him that we have in the collection when he was in a much older age show a little bit calmer countenance. Peter would have been only a little bit younger than he was in that photo when he produced the Watch Quarter Station Bill. Every lieutenant on board every Navy ship was required to do that. And the Watch Quarter Station Bill essentially provided the details of what everyone on the crew was doing, what watch they were on, where they were quartered, and where they were stationed, which were really two different things. In Peter's case, what it meant doing was, in a blank notebook journal, keeping a list of all 450 some odd members of the crew, writing down by hand every one of them by name, and noting which of the two watches that they were assigned to, and then separately noting where they would be assigned to be in terms of what gun they were serving on and where they would be when the ship was involved in sail evolutions. This detailed information was part of the choreography of running a ship like Constitution in the age of sail. The details were incredible in terms of what had to happen, and part of the goal in mapping all of this out in incredible detail was to ensure that everything could be done swiftly and accurately in battle when it needed to be. So as a result, this not only shows the names and crew numbers of every single member of the crew, but then goes on to show which guns that they are on and where they're located been assigned to in the case of setting, striking, hoisting, furling sails, raising anchor, etc., etc. This includes all the way down to knowing exactly which yards which sailors would be stationed to when it came time to furl sails. In several pages like this, we have outlines that Peter made of all three masts showing each of the yards and listing exactly where in the yard and by name who was responsible for what up and among the topmen. The topmen that Peter listed here were the ones that were capable of going up into the rig because they had the skill to climb and furl sails. But the rest of the crew in the meantime was also still busy on the deck. And Peter's Watch Quarter Station Bill goes into exactly who would have to be doing what in every evolution that the ship would be engaged in terms of sail. Here, for example, are some of the steps-by-steps that Peter details. And it's not only showing who does what, but it also continues to show exactly how everything was to be conducted. For historians, this is incredibly useful information. In fact, all of it is. Watch Quarter Station Bills are one of my favorite resources. Again, in terms of knowing more about the crew, they tell us exactly what each crew member was assigned to do, which in turn gives us an insight into those crew members' capabilities and what smaller groups within the ship they were likely to be making bonds with and people that they were likely to be serving with. The other thing it does for us is it's provide an incredible window into the exact operation of the ship. By walking through not only who was doing what, but the step-by-step process that had to occur for everything that happened, we can learn a lot more about how the ships were actually sailed. Other than Watch Quarter Station Bills and personal accounts from sailors, one of the main resources for understanding how full-rig ships were sailed during their active time is often books that were written as sort of textbooks that were designed to guide would-be sailors and provide guidance for captains. Those are really great, but they're not necessarily what ends up actually happening. And here, because each ship is unique, we can learn exactly what the intent was and learn more about how the ship was sailed. Sometimes, in the case of Peter Turner's bill, we also learn more about what the ship actually looked like. One of the specific things that we've learned just in the last year or so from Peter Turner's Watch Quarter Station bill was that when they were hoisting sail with all hands, the main topsail halyard, the largest, biggest driving sail on the ship, would lead down to the gun deck. Now, the halyard was the line that a whole lot of crew had to haul on in order to raise the yard that holds that big square sail up the mast. But if you're doing this with all hands, it means that the spar deck, the upper deck of the ship, is probably already incredibly crowded with other bodies doing other work. So this was a creative way of moving everyone to the gun deck. But as we discussed it, we didn't understand how the halyard would actually lead. But as a result of Turner, our work with our friends at Naval History and Heritage Command Detachment Boston, the group that maintains the ship's rigging and the ship itself, we found evidence that, in fact, at the base of the mast, there had been a small hole in the spar deck that was purposely designed to lead that halyard down to the gun deck so that there'd be more room down there for the sailors to haul on the lines. It's a fun discovery, but it gives us also a window into how much Constitution has physically changed and been changed over the years since she was actively sailing. The other thing that the Watch Quarter Station bill does is give us guidance on what happens in the case of an emergency. Watch quarter station bills are still used today on both commercial and Navy ships. And they do the same things that they were doing for Peter Turner all the way back then. They give you a list of who's doing what, who's responsible for what, who does what, when, and step-by-step guidance on what to do in a wide variety of situations. Turner's bill shows who's doing what and the process for doing it for everything from, like we were just saying, hoisting sail, furling sail, clewing down, hauling back an anchor, doing sail evolutions, tacking, wearing, and the like. But it also provides directions on who does what in the case of emergencies. And one of the biggest emergencies that sailors worry about, both then and now, is a fire on board the ship. A fire could get out of control very rapidly, and especially on a wooden ship, laden with black gunpowder for the guns. So Peter's bill goes into incredible detail over what's to happen and who does what in the case of a fire. It's these kind of details that provide another window into the hazards that they faced, but also the kind of work that they were doing at the time. And of course, just as you would imagine, the first step in responding to a fire is that on the first discovery of fire, the watchman on duty will give the alarm. So if there's a fire, start shouting fire. Peter Turner's bill is one of a couple watch quarter station bills that we have in the ship's museum. The other one is from Elie Villette from an earlier time period. And they're fascinating in that regard too, in that we're able to compare them to each other and begin to see sort of the changes that occurred on the ship and the ship's operation as it was doing different things and dealing with different kinds of operating circumstances and conditions. And that's one of the reasons that this is one of my favorite objects of the collection. The museum has a fairly substantive collection of Peter Turner's personal possessions, including this book, the daguerreotype, another photograph taken of him later on, as well as one of his wife, and also a writing desk, which was a little too large to pull out today, but it was a portable writing desk that would have sort of filled up the camera. It may very well have been the one in which Peter sat and wrote this very watch quarter station bill. Those portable writing desks were also super common among traveling mariners of the officer class because they needed someplace to keep all of the ephemera that went along with keeping a handwritten journal like this. I hope this is interesting to you as it is to me. I really love these documents. They're not as visually interesting unless you're really sitting down and going through them, but they do provide a wealth of information about the ship, the people, and the crew. Here at the USS Constitution Museum, Peter Turner's bill is one of thousands of documents that are stored and maintained in our archives as part of a collection that we continue to expand to this day. Everything from personal correspondence to ship's records and logs to more official documents like this. We'll continue to try and take a look at more of these. And if you have any questions that didn't come up here today, be sure to come back and visit and see on Facebook. You can continue to comment and we'll respond there to those additional questions as well. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.